What if Fran Fine, the titular character of The Nanny, was tasked with hunting ghosts and demons? Oh, Mr. Devil! I can't take credit for that joke. It's my husband's. I asked him to do it for you, but he doesn't like to be on camera, so. Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you so much for clicking on this video, which is part of a series I'm calling Fashioning Favorites, wherein I analyze the looks of my favorite film and TV characters and recreate their costumes with an eye towards sustainability. If you also love fashion, film, and culture, I hope you'll subscribe. My last video was bright and fun, and we're leaving the 90s sitcom world for something a little darker. My favorite genre, horror. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing looks inspired by paranormal investigator Vera Farmiga from the Conjuring franchise. Horror director James Wan's Conjuring universe is a broad one, including movies like Annabelle and The Nun, but I'm going to focus on this series proper. The Conjuring 1, set in 1971, The Conjuring 2, set in 1977, and the most recent release, The Devil Made Me Do It, set in 1981. These are the films that cover some of the real-life haunting cases documented by the darling demonologist couple Ed and Lorraine Warren. So why Lorraine?
I was so surprised at her sweetness, her absolute sweetness, and just how much she loved her guy. Then it came apparent to me that, oh, we're not only telling a scary story, there's a real love story here. And that's such a unique combination, and that's what sets it apart. And for me, the absolute contradiction of what she did, like the diabolical, that, you know, the grit and the grime of what, you know, she went through, and yet how she could retain such a gentleness and a sweetness. She was absolutely adorable.
Lorraine Warren, both the fictional character and the real-life figure, has a riveting persona as a self-assured yet gentle woman who devotes her life to fighting demonic spirits and caring for the haunted and possessed. Whether you buy into her beliefs about the spiritual realm or not, you must admit that her relationship to others, especially her husband Ed, is heartwarming.
For I can't falling in love with you.
I'm absolutely over the moon about how Ed's ties always match Lorraine's skirts. The cases covered in the Conjuring series span almost exactly over a single decade, the 1970s, 1971 to 1977, and 1981. The last one gives us a little leeway to anticipate what's coming in the 80s, but the Lorraine Warren character, especially as costumed by Kristen Burke in the first two movies, and to a lesser extent in the more recent release when costume designer Leah Butler took over, is a very interesting reflection on some of the trends that were changing fashion as we know it during the Me decade. The decade of Richard Nixon and the New Right, the Vietnam War dragging on, and the disco versus rock debates that created cultural divides that persist to this day. I should make a video about that. So, are we gonna have fun with the 70s? No, this is serious. No, really. This is a subtler study of the cuts of the time. If Lorraine wore paisley bell-bottoms, it would be harder to take her seriously and would undermine her dignified stature as the first lady of modernized ghost hunting. There has to be an understated and timeless quality to her looks because the plot lines of the films depend on the Warrens for stability and a connection to love and light. A Lorraine Warren who gets swept up in trends is a Lorraine Warren who gets easily swept away by the devil. I chose one look from each movie to recreate, and I have a lot to say about The Conjuring, especially Lorraine's outfits, so without further ado, let's get into the looks. The Conjuring. The tartan skirt, vest, the stand-up collar. To be honest, I'm starting with the best in fashion, which means the least in terms of wearability. This is definitely the most distinctive, audacious look Lorraine wears in all the movies, and we see it halfway through the first Conjuring. It's the second time, importantly, that we see her in a lecture hall. The first time she's wearing this matching vest and skirt set, which is also to die for, but more in line with her usual neutral color palette, especially the off-white frilly blouse. The fact that she's in a college setting when we see this outfit is crucial to establishing the Gothic mood and marrying the Warrens with dark academia. In case you didn't know, dark academia is a style of dressing that has a massive social media following and draws on intellectualism and stereotypes of how elite college students wear clothes. In the Takes video about dark academia, they note,
"Dark academia is nostalgic for a bygone idea of a liberal arts university, with its vintage clothes, leather-bound books, and Gothic architecture. Actually, glamorizing the past has always been a key part of elite universities' appeal."
Dark academia is a perfect fit for the Warrens. The public context in which we see them, whether it's in front of a chalkboard or sitting down with interviewers to talk about books they've written, lends credibility to the otherwise non-academic subject of, communing with dead people and inhuman entities. The Warrens consult the library less than they rely on the technological gadgets of their pals as they attempt to document scientific proof of the existence of the things that go bump in the night. But their vintage earthy vibes, think Ed's professorial jackets and ties, align them with the authority and substance of leisurely intellectualism. The relationship to academia for them is a vexed one, though, as Ed finds himself at odds with true scholarship.
We go on these shows to inform people, but every time I open my mouth, another one of these little ass academics pops up, tries to undo everything we've done.
Could you please take a breath?
I know. I'm counting to 10.
The ass academia aesthetic is also down to the fact that the 70s included trends that harkened back to Victorian silhouettes, which had characteristics of romanticism, especially the high neck, puffed shoulders, and fitted cuffs, which I just recently learned is called a leg of mutton sleeve. And the leg of mutton sleeve was actually first popularized in the 1500s before the 19th century revived it. In Vintage Fashion Complete, Nicky Albrechtsen tells us that it was the early 70s that saw the first true appearances of vintage clothing. Sometimes called the granny look, the trend deliberately embraced historical fashion as a reaction to the sleek stylization of the early 60s. The first vintage shoppers snapped up turn of the 20th century white lawn cotton dresses, pin-tucked blouses, and intricate cutwork petticoats. We obviously see Lorraine in tons of those lawn dresses and pin-tucked blouses. Of course, it's not just the 70s that often leans Victorian, it's also the horror genre, especially supernatural horror, that relies on the period for its relish of American spiritualism. You might have been as likely to be invited to a seance as to a dinner party in 1888. But I'm not a historian, so I'm not sure if that's true. Let's see what the New Yorker has to say. Last month, they did this piece called "Why Do So Many Victorians Try to Speak with the Dead?" And in it, Casey Sepp draws a parallel between today's interest in spiritualism and that which boomed in the late 19th century, musing that it is true that today's spiritualists have something in common with their Victorian predecessors, situated as they are in another era of rapid technological change and increasing secularization. No longer persuaded by orthodox religious accounts, but also not satisfied with pure materialism, they experiment with psychics, crystals, tarot, and astrological charts, or simply swap stories of the eerie and the unexplained. How many people do you know who not only can tell you their sign, but their whole birth chart with all the planets and moons and all that jazz? I know a few. It may be Victorian spiritualism's link to literary giants, think Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Mark Twain, William James, Sojourner Truth. That also draws a line from the late 1800s to the vintage-inspired 70s to the explosion of the current dark academia trend. So here is my homage to Lorraine's darkest, most Victorian, most academic look. The collar is stiff. She means business, but it's softened by ruffles. She's also sensitive, loving. There's a thin and delicate membrane between this world and the next. By the way, Sepp's article also makes note of women's role in spiritualism and the role of sexism in its subsequent decline. So Lorraine being the one with the powers in the Warren duo really does make all the sense in the world. We tend to associate femininity with the seduction of hell and fear how the mysterious second sex has emotional and spiritual acuity. Side note, if you want to bask in a feminist dark academia mood, you must watch Things Heard and Seen on Netflix. The real Lorraine wore a lot of preppy red plaid, which makes sense because of the academia connection and their connection to the church, plus the conservative politics of the 70s, when mainstream America was buttoning up after the 60s swing toward free love and miniskirts. I believe it was a very smart choice by costume designer Kristen Burke, though, to avoid red on Formiga for the most part, to tone down the splashiness and all that red connotes, like sex, in favor of cooler tones and keep darker patterns away from her face unless she was softening them with a lighter color and or cozy knitwear. With the exception of a black tee and gray cardigan look, which knitwear, in the first two films, Warren never wears dark colors on top without balancing them out with something lighter, which helps further symbolize that she's on the side of the good, and her purity is rarely tarnished by her entanglements with the unearthly world. This outfit, for example, might as well be a white cowboy hat. So my skirt is obviously not blue, but what it does share in common with the original is the burgundy accent color, which is in the palette of what 70s designer Barbara Hulanicki called anti-colors or auntie colors: smoky mulberries, rusts, and plums. Hulanicki was revered for vampish recreations of 40s film noir, which further connects Lorraine's referential fashions to the cinematic roots of horror and heroines. For my version, I was unable to replicate it precisely, but I got as close as I could in most other ways considering my time, budget, and ethical constraints. In case you don't know, when I put together these costumes, I shop my closet first, then vintage, then secondhand, and never fast fashion. This entire look, my maxi skirt, blouse, and vest are all from a shop I found on Etsy called Lolita Vintage. Next, Conjuring 2, the crochet vest. My second look also borrows from dark academia with the plaid pants, or at least light academia, but it's otherwise an attempt to recreate this outfit Lorraine wears in The Conjuring 2. Though the film follows the saga of the Hodgson family in London, where the Warrens will follow them, at this point in the movie they're at home in Connecticut and the year is 1977. For this look and the others in the second film, we're channeling the subdued colors, cuts, and fabrics worn by regular upstanding people, and not the 70s Liberty of London scene, which I'll touch on more in my video about Disney's Cruella. In an interview in Clothes on Film, costume designer Kristen Burke talks about the research they did for the second movie. She says, "We had some fabulous books, including one called New England, The Culture and People of an English Town During the 1970s and 1980s. I would also like to say that both of Lorraine's pants outfits, this one and this one, are curiously Annie Hall, which came out in 1977. Quite a fashionista, Lorraine. So it's the same year that little Janet was being possessed by Bill Weathers."
Stop calling me Janet.
I will mention again Lorraine's earthy colors, which were not only a staple of the 70s, but serve in this series to ground her in this world as she forays into the next. In that Dark Academia video by The Take, they talk about how creatives who promote the aesthetic evoke
the feeling of existing somewhere between material reality and a fantastical world you get access to through books.
That same function of traversing from reality to fantasy or past to present could be applied to Lorraine's need to move between this world and the next. They also have a lot of insight into dark academia rejecting utilitarianism, flipping the association of knowledge with light, and prioritizing the education of the soul. So of course I've linked the entire take video in the description box below. My pants are originally mage, but I got them and my chambray button-down secondhand from ThredUp. My vest is vintage from the Hip Zipper in Nashville, Tennessee. The specific vest I'm referencing is a brown one, but I snatched this up to ensure I had at least one cream piece represented, since that is a Lorraine Warren staple. And let's talk about Burke's boldness in putting Lorraine in so much cream and off-white. Costumes in movies have to take into account not just fashion, but practicality. Actors are shooting in the outfits every day, so they have to hold up or there have to be multiples of them. When asked about stain fighting, in particular related to this all-cream outfit she wears in the final scenes of the second movie, Burke says, "I knew that with all the action, water work, getting hurled against a wall, etc., it had to be durable, fitted enough to look good, but blousy enough to hide pads, elbow pads, back pads, knee pads." So I just think it's an interesting point to consider when critiquing costume designers, is that there are often elements we don't see, like needing to accommodate for protective gear, and that the condition and the ability to replicate a look and have continuity is something to consider. So cool. The last thing I have to say about this outfit is also my final argument about it fitting the dark or at least light academia aesthetic. It's a rather random coincidence, but in her video about dark academia, Alice Capel is wearing this. A knit vest over a button-down, even more like Lorraine's than mine. So, I rest my case. The devil made me do it. Speaking of legal parlance, the third and most recent Conjuring film departs from the haunted house trope and borrows a courtroom drama lens for a 1981 murder case using demonic possession as a defense. But how do we defend Lorraine's fashion in this one? Fair enough, the Warrens are aging. This installment sees Ed's heart problems, and Lorraine's work has presumably left her weakened. But I'm just a little disappointed. According to Amanda Mazzillo in Film Inquiry, the Conjuring series always works wonders in its costuming, perfectly capturing its era through these design choices. This third film kept up these high expectations for period accuracy. True. But I do think it's worth noting that the costume design changed as much as the haunted house trope did. So while Kristen Burke designed costumes for the first two movies, Leah Butler, who did the Annabelle movies, hopped on for this third one. Mazzillo writes, "The strong difference between how Arnie and Debbie are shown alone together and moments of the Warrens highlights how the same year/decade is represented differently for characters of different ages." Fair enough. My biggest complaint, though, is the departure from the color scheme and the more sophisticated restraint of Lorraine's previous incarnations. Butler puts Farmiga in more colorful stripes and more 80s patterns, which one could argue is primarily to mark the passage of time into a new decade, but I'm struggling to get behind it. Not least because I don't think Lorraine has the time to be so fashion forward as to go out and buy the newest blouses just because the calendar changed and is like, hello, it's the 80s. I think she would still be wearing what she wore last year. Also, she wears black for the first scene, which goes against the formula that I decided Burke had for the first and second. So don't listen to me. It might actually be Butler's genius. Spoiler alert. Wait, I'm used to doing that sarcastically. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the third film, I'm about to use a spoiler, so fast forward to this time if you want to avoid it. Okay, It could be that Lorraine wearing black in the beginning is actually genius. In that first scene, it's a great look. She's also wearing an 80s duds vintage gold brooch with a chain, and she has eyeglasses with a granny eyeglass chain, which I am not mad about. It's a great look. But the all black doesn't feel very Lorraine to me unless it's foreshadowing for how the witch, who does wear all black, is going to inhabit Lorraine's mind, and vice versa. So it's possible that Butler was playing with the themes here of this particular movie, like blurring the lines of the Warrens' innocence and showing their susceptibility to evil, as in the Shining parallel when Ed goes all Jack Torrance. Okay, spoiler over. In Butler's defense, this look is not all that different from the opening scene of the second film, and both scenes are meant to establish mood, either at a seance or an exorcism, and that mood is dark academia meets witchcore, and I'm here for it. So my recreation for this film, which I'll admit is the least accurate, is of this outfit. It's so boring. But it's 80s neutrals, you know how there was so much brown. You think of the garish colors and patterns of the 80s, but a lot of soccer moms in the suburbs were looking like they worked for UPS. And I need to talk about the change in pants. Yes, Lorraine wore pants in the first two movies, but here's the difference. She would either wear them at home, or if she wore them out, they were kind of nondescript, and the fact that they were 70s flares meant that they almost read as skirts and more flowy and feminine. But pants are a more noticeable characteristic in this movie because by the 80s, rises were creeping higher and masculinity was in. With the shirts tucked in, the pleats on the pants became a feature of the outfit rather than just disappearing. This also, I think, emphasizes Lorraine's age. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. Aging is not and should not be a style faux pas. But full disclosure, I am from the generation that learned about mom jeans on SNL as a joke. So I haven't completely let go of all the internalized misogyny and ageism that I got from that sketch. To be totally clear, I am not ragging on the costume designer anymore, or God forbid, Vera Farmiga. It's just not my favorite look personally. I do think it's wearable though, or at least you could create something similar to this that would be very wearable. My blouse is vintage from the Hip Zipper in Nashville, Tennessee. My pants are originally Aritzia Wilfred, but I got them secondhand on Poshmark. And the trench is from Rent the Runway. Does part of me regret using up one of my rental spots for this costume piece that I can only wear for this because it's the end of June? Yes. But I did it for you guys. In researching this last look, I learned something really cool about belts. Belts were, according to Albrechtsen, at their most prominent and decorative in the 80s. And the origins of belts and their embellishments, especially for military purposes, were selected for their supposed powers to help their owner avert danger, avoid captivity, and triumph over evil. So that's very apropos for our heroine. We need Lorraine protected, so if she needs to wear an elaborate belt, so be it. My final note about the last movie is that Lorraine's looks are not glamorous. This is not the 80s as Halston envisioned it. Lorraine may have shown us a peak of glamour in her younger days, like in the first film, but she's just over it now, and we have to watch her in an awkward and perhaps overly sentimental scene in a flashback, and she's running around in the forest, and maybe Ed is to blame for steering her away from her pretty dresses, as in this clip.
Hon, will you let me handle this? I'm gonna ruin your dress if you go in there.
JK, Ed, I still love you. So that's it. What did I get wrong? Let me know in the comments what you have to say about the Conjuring movies. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up at the very least. Leave a comment. If you feel like doing the most, you can try dressing up as Lorraine in your daily life or for your next Halloween costume. So if you do, make sure to tag me at MaggieWile on Instagram if you got any inspiration from this video. And if you didn't like this video, but you're still watching for some reason anyway, I just have this to say. The devil made me do it.